Let us pray. Our Father, keep us mindful of the special and unique opportunity we have to work for our constituents and for our province. And in that work, give us strength and wisdom. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Speaker, I'd like to table a response to question number 164.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table with the Assembly 4 copies of the communiques of the 27th Annual Premier's Conference.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table a return requested by the Minister of Environment on July 16th of this year, when in response to a question I had asked about landfill sites in Alberta, the Minister said, I would ask the member for Edmonton-Glengarry to kindly identify his bibliography of research. So I'm doing that today, and I would just take this opportunity to invite the Minister at his earliest possible convenience to also make good his commitment, given at the same time to, quote, file with the Legislative Assembly.
Please, the time of tabling is to do just that, rather than make the statement, please.
Introduction of special guests. Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Premier, and it has to do with the Premier's conference. We've had many sunny reports, but other than a warm glow, there doesn't seem to be much substance, at least I've been able to pick up. There did, however, don't be touchy. Don't be touchy.
Sensitive today. Sensitive.
Sensitive, eh? What would we do if we didn't have the backbenchers able to yell question? What would they ever do?
Right.
My question is about the free trade talk, so if I may, there seems to be somewhat a difference of opinion between this Premier, as chair of the meeting, and at least 2 others on support for the free trade talks. On a point of clarification to the Premier, did the Premiers endorse free trade talks moving ahead at full speed, or if not, why did the Premier leave that impression?
Mr. Speaker, when we develop a communique, we make sure that the Premiers, at least I as chairman in this conference, make sure that the Premiers have the freedom to disassociate themselves with the communique, or rather than it being unanimous, in which case we say the Premiers agreed, we switch to a consensus, which leaves Premiers the right to disagree. On the communique in free trade, the Premiers agreed. They had every chance to disassociate themselves with it or ask that it be merely a consensus. In the meeting, they agreed. And that communique was then made public, and they had every chance in advance to say they didn't agree with it. When the communique is made public, and if one of them wants to go outside and say something different, that's his prerogative. I can't control him once he's left the conference itself.
Well, supplementary question then to the Premier. I guess it wasn't quite as sunny as we thought about free trade, but I'd like to move into deficiency payments to farmers. And it seems to us that they turned that down because it would throw a monkey wrench into free trade talks. But would the Premier indicate why there was no specific strong demand regarding a deficiency payment for our producers?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, the matters on free trade were very sunny, and there was 100% agreement. And that's why, as the communique said, the premiers agreed on free trade matters as contained in the communique. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition raises the matter of deficiency payments. It's very clear that the 4 Western premiers endorsed the matter of deficiency payments at their meeting in Swan River, Manitoba. There were some additional discussion in the Premier's conference, and therefore the matter was unable to come to a consensus, and therefore we didn't discuss it. It didn't change the fact that the Western Premiers still endorse very strongly that matter.
Well, supplementary question flowing from the Premier's answer, Mr. Speaker, because we've been unable in this legislature to see how strong the commitment was to deficiency payments. Is it now then the Alberta government's position to push the federal government for a deficiency payment? And if that is so, what is the amount of money that the government is prepared to ask for?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, it is our position that if a deficiency payment is needed, then we will push for it. Secondly, we want to assess in the coming months just how much of a deficiency payment is needed, and then, of course, that would dictate the size.
Well, supplementary question. I understood at Swan Hills that the Alberta government signed an agreement, said we needed it, Swan River, excuse me, said we needed it. Now the Premier is saying if we need it. Which is it? Are we for deficiency payments or are we not? I think Alberta producers want to know this.
My previous answer dealt with that, Mr. Speaker. We are for deficiency payments in the event that our producers need it. And we feel that it is one way of fighting back against the external events and external forces that are hitting our agricultural producers.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier and back to the original question on free trade. In the talks between Canada and the U.S., is Alberta pressing to see that U.S. right to countervail is going to be up for negotiation, or is it on the table for negotiation?
Mr. Speaker, the trade talks cover the whole area of matters involved in trade. I wouldn't get into the details in the House now. That we have Ambassador Reisman negotiating for us, and I think he will deal with matters as they come on. We will have reports. We will approve certain things. I don't think it helps to try and pick out any individual subject.
Member for Littlebow.
Speaker, supplementary question to the Premier relative to the original question on free trade as well. Yesterday there was a meeting of the Representatives Subcommittee on Canada-U.S. Trade, and it resulted in a very negative reaction towards free trade initiatives, despite the fact that Peter Murphy, the U.S. chief negotiator, was the key witness. My question to the Premier, in light of this American protectionist sentiment that was in that committee hearing, coupled with Monday's communique that we had here in Alberta announcing that the Premiers will not let major Canadian resource sectors like agriculture, energy, and lumber be ruined by international competition, could the Premier indicate at this time what is the feeling with regards to success of the free trade negotiations, and does the Premier see the present or the upcoming American elections having a greater impact on possible progress?
Mr. Speaker, the United States, of course, has in their separation of powers, they have an administrative branch and then, of course, a congressional branch and judicial. Sometimes they are not in accord. It's clear in our mind and the minds of the Canadian government that the administrative branch, the executive branch, is in favor of free trade and is pursuing aggressively a matter of free trade. There are pockets of protectionism throughout the congressional branch in the United States, and it is highlighted in an election year. However, I would not want to speculate on the success or not of the negotiations currently underway, except to emphasize how important they are, and how important they are. Their success would be to Western Canada and certainly Alberta, since we produce much more than we use. And thirdly, to emphasize how strongly the premiers endorsed those free trade initiatives yesterday and the day before.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, I'd like to direct this question to the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs. Given reports that 4 major oil companies have raised their wholesale gasoline prices by to independent gas retailers, I believe by between 1.5 and 3 cents a liter. My question is, what actions has the Minister taken to try to protect Alberta consumers from unfair price increases for gasoline?
Mr. Speaker, it's my understanding that the matter to which the member opposite has referred is something that has happened in the province of Ontario and has not happened in the province of Alberta, and to that extent, of course, I couldn't comment. I would say, though, that gasoline prices at the pump are not regulated. That is a matter, the price is determined by competition at the pump, and to this extent, the government of Alberta does not participate in those prices.
Supplementary question. The Minister is correct. It started in Ontario, but it's going across Canada, and it will be here the price increases. And I'm a little puzzled by the answer then. Is the Minister saying that it is government policy that major oil companies can do whatever they want in the retailing market and the government will just sit idly by?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me comment first that the question is either hypothetical or anticipatory, and if the leader is encouraging the process to come across from the eastern Canada through Manitoba to Alberta, then I certainly would like to have more information in that regard. Furthermore, of course it is not the policy of this government to, as he says, allow oil companies to do whatever they want. I think if he were listening in this House day in and day out, he would understand that the policy of this government is to protect the resources of this province and to have them used in whatever is a fair and equitable way for all Canadians and all Albertans.
Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to supplement the answer from the Honourable Minister in that action has been taken or is being taken by our government with respect to a concern expressed to us by the producers in this province that refiners were purchasing the crude at prices below what they should have. And indeed, the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission have had discussions with the refiners in the past week, and I intend to have discussions as well to find out why.
Well, supplementary question. I'll come back to the Minister, but just to go back to the Minister of Corporate Affairs and say to the Minister, will the Minister be undertaking any study at all then to see why it takes 3 months for prices for consumers to fall as world prices fall, but yet it seems to take only about 3 hours when prices go up?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, I have difficulty answering a question that is full of misinformation, and without taking a great deal of time to relay the facts of the situation to the side opposite, which seems not to be what they want in any case, let me say once again that the consumer prices are set by competition at the pump. Now, again, the Minister of Energy may wish to supplement the answers because, again, what the position is in Alberta is that the price of oil and then gasoline is dealt with upstream, not at the pump.
Supplementary. I'll finish the supplementary. Thank you. My supplementary question is to the Minister of Energy, and coming back to his statement about producers, because that's the other end of the equation. Could the Minister be a little more specific and tell us exactly what measures the Minister is taking to ensure that Alberta producers receive the full benefit of this recent increase?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've indicated that the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission are having discussions with the different integrated companies and to outline to them our concern about the posting prices that have taken place since the fall started in January. And it's my intention, as I indicated a minute ago, to follow those up with discussions myself to see whether or not there are ways in which we can have the posting price reflect more what the Chicago posted price is. And there may be a role in that process, an increased role for the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission.
Supplementary member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Speaker, back to the minister. I'm glad in her faith in free competition. Hope she still believes in the tooth fairy. Could the minister tell us, or would the minister launch an investigation or give it for an answer to the legislature as to why refiners charge 25 to 35% more today to turn a liter of crude oil into a liter of gasoline than they charged 2 years ago?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I am not anticipating that course of action. And again, I think if the member were to listen to the Minister of Energy, it would be obvious to him that there are some discussions going on with producers and hopefully with refiners, and that is what your question is directed to.
Supplementary.
For a supplementary question to the Minister of Energy. The Minister of Energy has mentioned that there are alternate solutions that are being considered by the government relative to the energy industry, and one of those being the 5 cent a litre increase in taxation, possibly at the federal level. With this potential increase in cost of maybe 2-3 cents per litre, is the minister in his activities having discussions with not only with the various oil companies in terms of such increases relative to the new policy that may be announced by the government, that it may include a federal tax increase as one of the potential policy alternatives?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are a number of factors that go into the price of the pump, not only what the refiners get as a return or what the service station operators get as a return, but also taxation. And there's the federal tax that the return to the federal government has not changed that much since the prices had fallen. In January of this year, the federal government had a take of about 11.5 cents per litre on a 47 cent per litre price, and in June of this year, at a 36 cent litre, the federal government take was about 9.5 cents. It's the producers and the provincial government whose take has decreased from about 8.5 cents down to 3.5 cents. So I mentioned that as an indication of the different takes. The comment about the 5 cent per litre, I was not advocating that the federal government should put a 5 cent a litre tax on at the pumps. I indicated that as one possibility that they may want to consider, whether it be 5 cent, 1 cent, 2 cent. That's up to them to decide on and where they're going to find revenues in terms of dealing with an energy problem in this country. We intend to make a proposal to the federal government, and of course it's up to them to decide on where the money is going to come from.
Supplementary information?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I just point out to that darling of the NDP and the Liberals, Petro-Canada, surely wouldn't do things like this.
Supplementary question. Oh, I'm sorry, Honourable Member. Supplementary, member for Vermilion Viking.
Yes, in view of the conversation just recently to the Consumer and Corporate Affairs Supplementary, pricing in our area has gone to 26 to 29 cents a litre this weekend. Can I have the assurance, or would the minister indicate that if there will be no interference with the price rises that take place on a retail basis, that we won't have any interference at the lowering of it either?
Mr. Speaker, it is not the policy of this government to regulate consumer prices of gasoline at the pump. The competition between vendors regulates that market.
Leader of the Liberal Party, main question, followed by the Leader of the Representative Party.
Mr. Speaker, I hope the honourable member from the back bench now understands part of our feeling when he asked the question. Recently, Alberta farmer, this is to the Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Speaker, or you may want to pass it on to the Associate Minister. Recently, Alberta farmers received one more kick in the trousers that the federal Tory government doesn't give a darn about their 20 Tory MPs or even the legislature here. The Federal Department of Agriculture announced day before yesterday, that they are going to spend $35 million to increase feed grain production in the Maritimes, much to the detriment of Alberta farmers. Now, will the Minister of Agriculture tell us if he has consulted on this federal initiative, or if he was consulted on this initiative before it was undertaken?
Mr. Speaker, in response to the honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon, I can indicate to him, no, I was not consulted as it related to the announcement by the Honourable Minister John Wise on the 25th of July, whereby there is a 5-year commitment to expend $35 million in the far eastern provinces. And I can share with the honourable member that there is concern as it relates to the province of Alberta and this expenditure for the precedent that is being set. But I'm also encouraged by the agreement amongst the provincial premiers at the Premiers' Conference, whereby they are agreeable to and are going to pursue the removal of barriers between provinces so that we do have some consistency all across Canada as it relates to not only agriculture but all other sectors.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, I'm glad that he sees some sun in the clouds somewhere. But does the Minister of Agriculture know what the economic impact on Alberta grain producers, particularly barley producers, will be because of the subsidy?
Mr. Speaker, we've had our departmental people do somewhat of an assessment, and it has been an initial assessment, so I should share with the honourable member to date, the assessment shows that the impact is going to be very small. It is going to have a greater impact on the corn producers in Ontario.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, I would like to share with the Minister my research and underscore the fact that is the Minister aware that Alberta's share of the 250,000 tons or $30 million market will be lost to the federal fiasco, will be in the nature of maybe as much as $10 million over the next number of years.
Mr. Speaker, I've got nothing further to add than the response I gave to the honourable member earlier, indicating to him what our initial assessment has shown. But unlike the honourable member opposite, we believe there is a great hope and vitality in this province, and we are going to sustain whatever hardships are endured, and we've consistently supported the agricultural sector so that we could continue to sustain this very, very dominant role in the economic affairs of this province.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, I agree with him. There is a great hope in this province, and it is that they'll vote Liberal next time around. But can the Minister, as the former federal Tory MP, explain how or why his former colleagues would offer the Maritimes a $35 million production program at the same time a $16 million freight assistance program was offered to Western Canada? How would they put in these counterproductive schemes?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member amazes me with his intelligence. The $16 million program related to Eastern Canada, not Western Canada, because they're two contradictory programs. The one offsets the other, which I agree with the honourable member is ridiculous. But it has nothing to do with Western Canada. And I should share with him a number of these programs were instituted and were in place when his dear friends were in power.
Leader of the Representative Party, main question.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier and to my colleague. There's farmer optimism in the Liberal Party now. Next year will be a better year. Couldn't resist. To the Premier, and it's relative to the constitutional discussions that took place in the First Minister's meetings the last few days. The new Constitution amending formula proposed by Quebec Premier Bourassa guarantees Quebec a veto. Will the Premier commit to oppose any amendment formula that allows one individual province veto power in constitutional changes?
Mr. Speaker, I don't think we should go into any discussions already declaring in advance a whole series of positions. As a matter of fact, in our meeting, we did not pursue a discussion of Quebec's 5 proposals. We agreed that the 5 proposals, as outlined in a speech by Premier Bourassa in his legislature, would be a basis for discussion. But there may be other proposals, there may be counter-proposals. What we agreed to was to set as a top constitutional priority, and I might point out here, Alberta's top priority in this conference was not the Constitution, but rather the economy. And the significant strides we made were in that area. Nevertheless, we did agree that Canada's Constitution is flawed when one province, and a large province, is not a part of that Constitution. And therefore, we've set in place a process which will allow us to see if there are ways to bring Quebec fully into the Canadian Federation. I think that would be good for Canada.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question. There was a number of other items that were placed on the table for discussion, such as the federal spending authority in Quebec and appointment of Supreme Court judges. Could the Premier indicate what type of a schedule is now in place, or is the schedule left open and would be met according to need at a point in time, or is there a 2 or 3 year schedule in place to discuss these specific matters?
When you're dealing, Mr. Speaker, with something as sensitive as amendments to the Constitution or that might be involved in this case, it's hard to speculate about the time that might be taken. But the schedule, as we generally understand it, is that immediately Province of Quebec's Intergovernmental Affairs Minister will be touring to each of the provinces, explaining their position on the 5 proposals and exploring whether there are counter-proposals that provinces may want to take. After that, there will be federal-provincial meetings, at which time each province will designate a minister from their province to be involved to investigate further any discussions on a federal-provincial basis. Then I assume at some stage, should things progress satisfactorily, that we might be involved in a First Minister's meeting also discussing those proposals, other proposals, and seeing if there is some possibility of bringing Quebec fully into the Canadian Federation.
Member Leader of the Opposition.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, in view of the possibility, at least, advanced by Quebec about a veto for them, was any discussion given to Native groups who have a great deal of concern about a Quebec veto before their relationship in Canada is clarified?
As I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, we didn't get into the details at all. That is for the future when the process begins.
Leader of the Liberal Party.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Would the Premier care to share, or would he share with the legislature, which of the 2 proposals of the 75% majority vote, or each of the 4 regions of Canada having a veto, which of those proposals does he prefer?
No, I wouldn't, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Cypress Redcliffe, followed by the member for Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier relating to the communique on agriculture, and it is that I noticed in the last line of the communique the Premiers relate to issues in the next GATT negotiations, and I wondered if the Premiers are pushing for observer status at the GATT negotiations so that the observers can readily report to the provinces about what status we're having in agriculture at those negotiations.
Mr. Speaker, it was a major point with the Premiers that we do have a full participation in the various trade negotiations, and in the GATT negotiations, we're extremely pleased that Alberta's Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs has been invited to participate and will be participating in Uruguay in September in initial discussions.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Again, to the Premier. I wonder if in the communique they relate to commitments to remove internal barriers. I wonder if Mr. Premier, if you have instructed the Minister of Agriculture to meet with the other, or the Premiers have instructed their Ministers of Agriculture to meet to remove these barriers and to see that things, as one of the previous questioners said, don't appear in agriculture policies give an unfair advantage to other areas of the country.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The Government of Alberta considers this a very important matter, and various ministers of our government have been asked to work with other provinces to ensure that we remove as many as possible of the interprovincial barriers existing in Canada.
Mr. Speaker, another supplementary to the Premier. In the communique is noted that the Premiers deplore the recent U.S. action of subsidizing their market products, especially grain. I wonder if the Premier has instructed again the Minister of Agriculture or the Minister of Economic Development to get together with the Canadian Wheat Board and other ministers and see if they can assist the Canadian Wheat Board in moving some of our product to other markets in the world, and especially what the Wheat Board calls junk grains now that aren't in great quantity but very important to certain sectors of this country.
Mr. Speaker, over the past period of time, the Minister of Agriculture for this province has been dealing with the Canadian Wheat Board along these very lines. But might I say that there is new impetus and new support for many of the things that Alberta is doing and wants to have done in the future as a result of a very successful Premier's Conference. I think we went into this conference as our number one priority to obtain support from all of the provinces for our initiatives in energy, assistance to the energy industry, and also for agriculture, so that Alberta's economy, that is based so heavily on both of those industries, would be assisted and, of course, start to grow in the future. This communique gives us the basis, with a great deal more aggressiveness now, to go through the various federal and other provincial mechanisms to make sure that they are followed up on, and every Alberta minister with a responsibility contained in these communiques will be doing that very quickly.
Supplementary, Cypress Ratcliffe. Member for West Loch Sturgeon.
Supplementary to the Premier. It's good news on moving ahead, but can he give the assurance to the House that there will be a meeting of all agricultural ministers, attempt to schedule one for all agricultural ministers to solidify the national agricultural strategy before GATT and before the November 1st Ministers' Conference?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the agricultural ministers and their officials have been working on this aggressively. They will be meeting again because it must come to the Premier's conference in November. And we're looking forward to having, as we said, the National Agricultural Strategy discussions completed and presented to the First Ministers so that we will be able to give it our approval, assuming that it does meet our needs.
Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I take from the honourable member's question that the Premiers have asked for this observer status at the GATT round, although they previously gave up observer status at bilateral talks with the Americans. Have the Premiers learned something about the talks with the Americans which they don't want to have repeated at the GATT round?
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member will recall, we asked for observer status at the bilateral negotiations with the United States. Some provinces expressed, and I've advised the House, that they didn't think that was correct. We agreed to go along on a 90-day basis to see how it works that way. But we are also having the opportunity to see how it works our way or the way we thought might be better, in the GATT round. I think it gives us a good balance. I might also say that in the free trade talks with the United States, we have the additional support of regular officials meetings, regular ministerial meetings, and a commitment to First Ministers meetings every 3 months. I think what we have done, in effect, is get the best of both worlds.
Member for Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche, followed by the member for Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister responsible for Native Legal Affairs. In November of 1985, the federal Lubicon mediator, the Honourable E. Davy Fulton, recommended to the federal minister that in the event that bilateral negotiation didn't work, there should be a direct reference to the Supreme Court to settle this question of the band's Aboriginal title once and for all. Does the Alberta government support a direct reference to the Supreme Court, or is it opposed?
Mr. Speaker, the recommendations that the Honourable Mr. Fulton may have made to the federal government have not, in fact, been made to this government. It will be the federal government's responsibility to determine, as it is their constitutional responsibility to determine what native land claims entitlements there may be under the treaties relative to unresolved treaty claims, not the responsibility of the province of Alberta. So the question should be properly addressed by writing a letter to the appropriate minister of the federal government and seeking a response that way.
What's your stand? Alberta might have a whole choice in the matter, might not have any choice in the matter, and I think it's time that they get to work on this. The band says that the bilateral negotiations have broken down completely. Given this, what is the position and recommendation of the Alberta government on the best way to get this shameful situation settled as quickly as possible?
Mr. Speaker, the band in question has consistently, throughout the whole of this matter, refused to participate in discussions which have involved the province of Alberta and have rejected out of hand trilateral discussions on the issue. Therefore, and in keeping with the honourable members can squawk all they like, the fact of the matter is that under the Constitution of Canada, the government at the federal level is responsible under Section 92 for determining and dealing with Native affairs. The government of Alberta has a responsibility pursuant to the Natural Resources Transfer Act to deal with duly validated land claims, and we intend to do so when presented with one.
It's Alberta government land. I would suggest it would be in the province's best self-interest to get the negotiation going again. In 1982, the province...
Honourable member. Please. The chair has been listening for the supplementary question. One comment was made. The member is now embarked on a second comment. Please come to the supplementary question.
Mr. Speaker, well, in all due respect, the Premier can get up and talk about Petro-Canada whenever...
Please be seated. The chair will recognize... The chair will return to the point of order at the end of question period. The member for Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche on the supplementary question, please.
In 1982, the province filed a document with the Court of Queen's Bench, which said there was $500 million a year in energy-related revenue generated in the Lubicon traditional area. Does the minister have any current information or undertaken any study on the cost to the province of a Supreme Court's decision which would uphold the band's claim to Aboriginal title? Aren't we talking about hundreds of millions of provincial money here?
Mr. Speaker, the matter is an action brought against the government of Alberta by the Lubicon Band. The matter is before the courts. Certain proceedings can take place within the court system of this province relative to the issue that has been commented upon by the honourable member. But it is entirely inappropriate, while the matter is before the courts, for that matter to be discussed in this legislative assembly.
In my last supplementary, due to the great significance of the Lubicon and other Aboriginal right issues for all governments in Canada, did the Alberta government ensure that there was some discussion of these issues during the recent Premier's Conference? And if not, why not?
It would have been entirely inappropriate to discuss Aboriginal rights and issues without the participation of the Aboriginal groups, which represent the Aboriginal peoples of Canada. That is why we have a process in place now whereby the Aboriginal peoples meet not just with the federal and provincial governments, but with the territorial governments. There will be a meeting of that ministerial committee in October of this year, leading up to the next constitutional round. For the honourable member to suggest in his question that we should have discussed those issues without the Aboriginal peoples being present, I think is inappropriate.
Boy, wait till this gets back.
Now, the honourable... There were two parts to the honourable member's supplementary question. I've answered the latter one, and unless he wishes to restate the other one later on and clarify the situation, I can't recall exactly what the first part of his question was.
Supplementary question, Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplementary to the minister. While appreciating his newfound virtue, will he not admit that the land under which it's under dispute for the Lubicon Indians has already been sold by the provincial government, the mineral rights to, the money pocketed by the provincial government as far as the Indians are concerned? And how will he explain that?
Mr. Speaker, in an attempt to resolve this matter out of court, and that was a matter, on December 10th of last year, the then Minister responsible for Native Affairs announced that Alberta would be willing to transfer 25.4 square miles of land to Indian Affairs in trust for the band. And of course, that was rejected. And until such time, well, the honourable member is aware that with respect to mineral rights, the suggestion was also made at that time that the following conditions be met by the federal government and the band as the survey and transfer took place. First, that the federal government take over oil and gas leasehold interest on behalf of the band, that a fair and equitable settlement of Métis and other third-party interests be provided, and that the band withdraw its litigation against the province. Now, that bilateral negotiation process began on June 16th between the federal government and the Lubicon Lake Band, aimed at resolving that, and the federal government had wanted Alberta to be involved in the negotiations. The band was opposed to those trilateral negotiations. I repeat that. Mr. Speaker, I think it is important for honourable members to be clear in their minds, if it is possible, as to what is taking place in this matter, and we should not be subjected constantly to matters which tend to muddy the water and obscure the facts of the responsibility that this government has.
Thanks, John. Chair recognizes the member for Edmonton Centre, and if there is time, the member for Calgary-Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recent surveys of drug prices on both sides of the border clearly demonstrate that Canadian generic drug companies offer products at far more competitive prices than do the major brand name pharmaceutical conglomerates. What studies has the Minister of Consumer Affairs done to determine just how much the recent federal Conservative government's moves to amend the Patent Act, hence limiting generic drug companies' competitive ability, would increase the cost of drugs to diabetics and other Albertans who, at their doctor's request, are regular consumers of pharmaceuticals in this province?
It is true, Mr. Speaker, that a survey done in Alberta indicated that the price of drugs, the most commonly used drugs in Alberta, was less than in any other place in Canada. That study was done 2 years ago, and I have indicated to the department that it would be very useful to have an update. Insofar as the larger subject of generic drugs and the Patent Act is concerned, my colleague, the Minister of Economic Development, may wish to supplement my answer, but I will point out that the Patent Act is federal legislation, not provincial.
But it is been worked on. May I ask my good friend, the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care, what I can tell the many elderly and others of my constituency who are alarmed by the prospect of increasing expensive drug prices? Will the Minister be raising the premium portion, these costs of these people that they pay, or instituting a user fee, decreasing the number of drugs the extended benefits cover, or having Alberta healthcare insurance cover the whole?
How many, honourable member, out of the number of questions you asked, which one would you prefer that the minister answers, please?
It was a sort of a multiple choice. He could pick whichever one.
None of the above.
Mr. Speaker, our government has been made aware of the actions being proposed by the federal government with respect to patent protection and generic drugs. I should say, first of all, that there's some considerable validity in action at the federal level that will result in what they believe to be significantly more research in Canada toward the development of new drugs. And that, in spite of the honourable member's lack of knowledge about the situation, is the reasons given by the federal government for moving in the direction they have. Honourable members should know that there has to be a balance in any type of patent protection to ensure that the public is well served, while at the same time those who spend money developing new products and new services can recoup some of their expenditures and continue to do research. My understanding, Mr. Speaker, is that part of the agreement with the manufacturers of drugs includes a commitment by them to expend certain amounts of money on research over some period of time. The thing that we need to be doing, insofar as Alberta is concerned, is keeping a very close watching brief on what's occurring, making sure that there is no detrimental effect on our citizens. I frankly don't believe there will be, but we'll be watching that very closely. And indeed, we don't believe anybody will be suffering from the lack of being able to purchase drugs because of that policy.
Time for question period has expired. May we complete this question with its supplementaries? Is there agreement? Opposed, if any? Agreed. Supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since, this is to the Premier, since the U.S. brand name drug companies have long argued that a 10-year pricing monopoly for them should be a condition for free trade negotiations, why isn't this government fighting, as Manitoba is, fighting these arguments when we know that they will result not in free trade but in a free flow of money from Alberta to the U.S. Monopolies for their research in the United States?
Mr. Speaker, in light of the manner in which the honourable member asked his previous question, I give him the answer yes and no, and he has a multiple choice.
Final supplementary.
They're getting awfully smart over there. Well, let's get back to the Minister of Consumer Affairs. Why is the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs, together with her colleagues, not objecting more strongly to the federal government in the formulation and implementation of this restrictive federal government policy, given this government's supposed commitment to free enterprise, free trade, and the utter sanctity of the free competitive way?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do think that the member has given the answer to his own question.
Thank you. Supplementary, member for Calgary Northwest.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to address a question to the Minister of Economic Development, if he would comment on what the impact of the lack of protection for patent rights would have in this province when we're trying to encourage research and development in so many other fields.
Mr. Speaker, a number of years ago, the government of Alberta, with the support of all members of the Assembly, established the Medical Research Endowment Fund. And it's resulted in activity in the scientific area in Alberta that matches anything in the world in terms of the development of new medical ideas, including the development of drugs. one of the difficulties that has persisted in Canada is the inability of these developments in terms of technological breakthroughs being converted into economic activities, that is, the manufacturing and the development of jobs in the production of these products that could be available worldwide, has been the limiting factors in the federal legislation. So the province of Alberta is supportive of initiatives that can be taken by way of legislation that will result in jobs in Alberta that result from the technological advances that are made by Albertans in this field.
Additional supplementaries? The chair recognizes the fact that as the chair concluded the prayer today, that one was greeted by a flurry and a forest of hands signifying their desire to enter question period. The end result is that if perhaps tomorrow there might be shorter questions and shorter answers, that the six members who were not able to get into question period today might be able to achieve that esteemed prize tomorrow. Orders of the day.
Order, Mr. Speaker.